I've made slight. I used to work for the sheriff in Greenleaf County, back in the mid-90s. Greenleaf is truly isolated, one of the poorest areas in all of Missouri. When I served as a deputy, there were barely over 10,000 people in the whole county. It was, and still is, the kind of place you'd pass through without a second glance. But Greenleaf? I think about it all the time. Sometimes, it's all that fills my mind, no matter how much I drink or the pills I take. In late '96, Greenleaf got overrun with a cheap version of crystal meth they called crank or biker meth. High-quality meth has crystals, hence the name, but this stuff was a rough white powder, gritty and harsh on users' throats because of the garbage it was mixed with. We were finding it everywhere, and it was ruining the lives of people who had nothing to begin with. It was in the schools, bars, even churches. We arrested one teenager who'd been awake for days, twitching in the pews, and when the collection plate came by, he just grabbed the cash without even caring who saw. He didn't have any plan for an escape, just too messed up to think straight. Within 4 months, violent crime went through the roof. People flocked to Greenleaf from all over to buy the cheapest, dirtiest meth we'd ever seen. I handcuffed people from Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, even as far as Ohio. The sheriff got a call from the governor, ordering us to get a handle on it. You can imagine how that command came down on us. But we couldn't trace where the meth was coming from. Anyone we busted who was dealing wouldn't say a word about their supplier, no matter what pressure we put on them. These dealers were unusually tight-lipped, more like gangsters than regular tweakers who'd usually do anything to avoid jail and detox. But these guys, they kept quiet like they were terrified of whoever was above them. We arrested one guy with a hefty load of it, 6 pounds. I drove him to the county jail for booking, and after dropping him off, I noticed that mud had been caked all over the floor beneath the back seats of my cruiser. The smell was awful, and I was furious about the mess. Then it struck me, this mud had to come from somewhere. Judging by the timing, we must have caught this guy right after he'd made a pickup. So wherever he'd come from was real muddy, maybe near the river or one of the lakes in Greenleaf. I decided to drive around and see what I might find. A little hike too if I felt up for it. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? If I found their operation, it'd be a huge win. Turns out that was the worst decision I could have made. I used to go fishing with my dad when I was a kid, and that's about all there was to do in Greenleaf. There are over 40 lakes and reservoirs there, and I'd been to nearly all of them. Most of the shores are gravel or sand, but one is pure mud. It's the kind where you lose your shoes if you don't wear boots. They call it Muddy Lake, real creative. That's where I drove that day. Muddy Lake isn't a popular fishing spot unless you're looking to catch monster catfish, which aren't worth the trouble. As I walked along the shore, I noticed smoke drifting up from across the lake. It was faint, so faint that if the wind had been blowing just a little, I'd have missed it. But that day was still and quiet. I spent 20 or 30 minutes circling the lake until I reached the area where the smoke came from. The closer I got, the stronger the stench became, a mix of rotten eggs and cat urine. I also saw patches where plants had started to wither, like nothing could survive near whatever I was getting close to. I thought about turning back a few times, but then I stumbled upon a cluster of shacks made from wood and rusted metal sheets. I should have called out, announced myself as a deputy, but a heavy dread kept me silent. In small towns like Greenleaf, we don't always go by the book. Besides, it was silent. No signs of life, save for a small campfire still smoldering between the shacks. I pushed open the door to one of the shacks with my .44 drawn, and the smell hit me like a wall. I'd never seen a working meth lab before, but I knew instantly that's what this was. Trash was everywhere, cold medicine packages, cut-up batteries, used coffee filters, and there was crude glassware on a table reeking of chemicals. I backed out, coughing and gagging, but feeling a strange relief. I was sure I'd found our meth operation. When I checked the other shacks, I started feeling uneasy. The second one seemed like a sleeping area with 2 camping cots set up. But they didn't look slept in, they were buried under trash like gas cans and tubs of raw chemicals. There were even piles of dollar bills, scattered as if they didn't care about the money. It seemed like these people were flooding Greenleaf with crank, not for profit, but for something else. But what really disturbed me were the walls. They were covered in odd phrases and symbols scrawled in black marker. Chicken scratch handwriting, nearly illegible, mixed with devilish figures and stars. I stepped back, shaken, and went to check the last shack. The smell hit me before I even opened the door, a different stench worse than the meth lab. I opened it just enough to see, and nearly vomited. There, surrounded by more trash and scattered money, was a large wooden stake driven deep into the ground. Tied to it was a mutilated corpse. The person had been dead for a while, but not long enough to fully decompose. Flies and maggots covered their face and body, making it look like the poor soul was moving. The horror on the face made it clear they'd been tortured. Scalped, missing an eye, fingers cut and burned. Deep, dark cuts marked the body like some kind of ritual. Whoever had done this had taken their time. As I turned to leave and radio for backup, I heard something rustling through the trees. I spun around and saw a filthy figure. A man wearing only boots, stained underwear, a leg holster with a knife and a gas mask. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder, but I had my .44 trained on him. I told him not to move, and he raised his hands slowly, his eyes staring through the foggy mask. There was nothing there, just a hollow gaze, like a doll's eyes. Then, I heard movement behind me, maybe his partner. I turned to look, and in that split second, he pulled his rifle, ready to fire. I shot 3 times and missed. He fired back, bullets ripping through the shacks. I managed to take cover behind a tree, my heart racing as he chased me through the woods, barking like a rabid animal. I reloaded, thinking of the corpse back in the shack and fearing I'd end up the same. Finally, I saw him coming at me with his knife raised. I shot all 6 rounds, hitting him each time. He dropped, lifeless, but it wasn't over. I had to drag myself, injured, back to my cruiser. I passed by the tortured body, expecting it to come alive, but it didn't. I eventually made it back and called for help. That day cost me. The bullet that hit my leg left fragments in my shin, and I've limped ever since. The mental scars are worse. I couldn't sleep for months, waking up soaked in sweat, my wife eventually sleeping in another room until therapy helped. We're still together now, and we live comfortably in Georgia, thanks to government compensation. I was given a medal, but I keep it locked away, not proud of the memory. Writing this feels like closure, but the memories of Muddy Lake will stay with me forever. Back in October of 2018, a new game dropped for Xbox and PlayStation that would quickly take the gaming world by storm, capturing players' attention and time for ages. People probably wondered why howdy suddenly became more common than hi in casual conversations, or why tons of people seemed too sick to make it to work the day after its release. And when they did show up, all they could talk about was getting back to a place called Horseshoe Overlook. For those who haven't guessed it yet, the game I'm talking about is Red Dead Redemption 2. Anyone who made it through the storyline knows the obsession that followed. But for me, it went beyond just dressing up as a cowboy on Halloween. I wanted to experience it for real. No, I'm not talking about robbing trains or hunting down gators. I just wanted to explore the open countryside on horseback, seeing parts of the country city folks like me rarely visit. That's how I found myself in Glasgow. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, how did Red Dead lead you all the way to Scotland? But there's another Glasgow way out in Montana. And by way out, I mean it's really out there, isolated in the middle of almost nowhere. Took us about 2 days on horseback to reach it from where we started. It felt like a tiny spot of civilization in an endless stretch of wild terrain. Or at least that's what I thought, until I met some of the locals. No offense to anyone from around there, but let's just say some folks in that part of Montana have a wild streak. And I ended up crossing paths with one of them. After 2 full days of hard riding, I finally understood what being saddle sore meant. The plan was to spend a couple of days relaxing in a small town of about 2,000 people before hitting the trails again. And after those 2 days, I also got why cowboys were known to drink so much. It probably wasn't just to chase away loneliness or guilt, but to numb the ache from hours in the saddle. It feels like your body took a beating from an iron fist. So, a few of us from the trail group found this little bar called Abby's Place over on 1st Avenue South, and we got down to some serious drinking. I'll admit it, I was probably a bit too loud and maybe even said some unkind things about small towns like Glasgow. I didn't mean any harm, but looking back, I get why someone might have taken offense to what I was saying or how I was dressed, because someone certainly did. From what little I remember, this guy walked up and asked what my problem was. I remember my response all too well because the guys in my group didn't let me forget it for days. I threw on my best John Wayne voice and said, "My problem's with you, partner," giving his arm a slap as if I was hilarious. Only he didn't find it funny at all. That part of Montana wasn't a novelty for him. It was his home. In my drunken state, I didn't realize I'd started something I couldn't handle. By the time I figured out he was genuinely angry, it was too late. I ticked him off enough to make him want to punch me out. I tried to apologize, muttering that I was just tired and drunk, but the whole bar was looking at me. Even my trail buddies weren't too thrilled. We ended up getting thrown out. That's when it hit me. I'd been more of a troublemaker than a cowboy that night. The next morning, I was ashamed and honestly relieved to be leaving Glasgow behind. But I didn't deserve what happened next, and my trail buddies definitely didn't either. A few hours after we set out at dawn, heading west, I heard what sounded like firecrackers popping just above my head. Exhausted and hungover, I didn't catch on right away, but the horses did. They freaked out. Our guide started yelling for us to turn back and keep our heads low. That's when I realized we were being shot at. I'd never been shot at before, so I didn't know that when a bullet passes close, it makes a snapping sound as it breaks the sound barrier. It's like a tiny sonic boom. We bolted back to Glasgow, about 15 miles, to report that someone had actually taken shots at us on the trail. We ended up back at the motel, spending extra money for the horses' care, which honestly was the least of our concerns after nearly being hit. Later, a few of us headed back to Abby's place to take the edge off and calm down. We also wanted to apologize for last night's behavior. And guess who was there? The guy I'd ticked off. Just as I was about to apologize, I caught him grinning. In my half-awake, hungover state, I didn't understand the look right away. Then it clicked. I walked up, this time angry, and asked, "You were the one who shot at us, weren't you?" Laced with a few choice words, of course. He just grinned wider and said, "Boy, if I'd aimed at you, you wouldn't be standing here right now." His words chilled me, and he followed up with something like, "And good luck trying to pin it on me." We look after our own around here. That was the most frightened I'd been in a long time, in a way that went deeper than the fear of being shot at. For the second time in 2 days, I was grateful to be getting out of Glasgow. Back in the day, I worked for the National Trust in Scotland. It was a pretty lonely job, with most of my time spent either driving long distances or wandering through the highlands in rough weather. At work, I had a big 4x4 to drive, but outside work, I had to rely on my own car, which was terrible. One Saturday, I planned to drive down to England for my mum's birthday. My boyfriend and I had this big surprise arranged for her. I'd drive down in the morning, help set up, and then go pick her up for the surprise. I was thrilled about it, and I was sure my mum would be over the moon. But what I wasn't too sure about was my poor little Nissan Micra making it all the way without any problems. So, there I was, driving through the highlands, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, when the engine started making some really nasty sounds. I pulled over, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I thought I could make it to a garage, but when I tried to start the car again, it wouldn't budge. The engine tried to turn over but just wouldn't start, no matter what tricks I tried. Nowadays, I just open an app and call for a tow. But back then, with a spotty mobile signal, breaking down in the middle of nowhere was a real hassle. I tried the engine a few more times, all while preparing myself for the cold walk ahead. It was November, so freezing, with highland winds that made the idea of walking feel impossible. But finally, I zipped up my coat, put on my hat and gloves, and got out of the car. Just as I started walking, a car appeared in the distance. The road was lined with trees, so I hadn't seen it coming. I silently prayed that whoever it was would stop for me, and they did. But looking back, I don't think it was a higher power that answered my prayers that day. The car pulled over, and a middle-aged man with a friendly face rolled down his window and asked if I was okay. I told him about my car trouble, and he said he might be able to get a friend to come and fix it on the cheap. I was thrilled. He invited me into his car, and we started making small talk, swapping stories about why we were both in Scotland. Once we got to my car, he pulled out his phone and started texting, apparently contacting his friend. He explained that in the Highlands, texting worked better than calling because the signal was so weak. After a minute or two of holding his phone up, he assured me that the message had gone through, and his friend would be on the way. I just had to wait a little while. As we waited, though, I noticed a small inconsistency in his story. At first, he said his business was based in one area, but later he mentioned another location. I didn't think too much of it at the time. People misspeak all the time, and maybe he had more than one office. But it was the first small red flag. A bit later, he asked if anyone was expecting me, using that exact phrase, "Is anyone expecting you?" I must have given him a strange look because he added, "You know, do you have plans later?" I told him about my mom's party and how I'd been planning it for weeks, but he just nodded and looked off into the distance. The question and his lack of interest gave me a bad feeling. At that point, I knew I needed to do something. So, I asked how long his friend would take, and he checked his phone, saying it would only be a few more minutes. I told him I needed to grab some things from my car, just in case it needed a tow, and stepped out. Once at my car, I pretended to search for things, all the while watching the road. After a few minutes, a big white van pulled up behind us. The van looked brand new, and there were two people in it instead of one. Something didn't feel right. I decided I would wait to see if they were actually there to help. But just as I thought this, the stranger called out, saying that his friend was already working on my car. Only I could see part of my car and no one was there. Right then, his tone of voice changed, and to my shock, he used my name, which I'd never given him. I was hiding among the trees, and when he started calling my name, he made it clear that if I didn't show myself, it wouldn't be good for me. That was the scariest moment of my life. Then, I heard an engine start, and I saw the stranger's car drive off. But instead of leaving, one of the men in the van stepped out, wearing a mask, and started searching the trees. That was when I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had, only stopping when I couldn't go any farther. I must have looked a mess because after a while, a driver finally stopped to help me. They took me to the police station where I reported everything. I was scared, exhausted, and disappointed, knowing I wouldn't make it to my mom's party. I spent the night at a bed and breakfast, feeling like the whole day had been a nightmare. The police questioned the man, but since he hadn't broken any laws, they couldn't charge him. He claimed he was just trying to help, and I'd run off for no reason. Even now, I can't help but wonder how many others weren't as lucky as I was that day. I'm grateful I escaped, but the thought of others who might not have haunts me. When I was finishing my master's degree, I had to find a roommate to save on rent. I put an ad up on Facebook and got a message from a guy named Mark. I was nervous about possibly living with a total weirdo, but instead, I found someone who became one of my closest friends. One of the first things we bonded over was our shared love of long-distance hiking. He brought it up during a call when I asked about his hobbies, and we spent a good half hour swapping stories and getting hyped about the outdoors. We went on our first hike together over spring break in 2004, and from that point on, it was like we were brothers. After graduation, we both moved to different places, but we kept in touch through social media and online games. At least once or twice a year, we'd plan another big hike. Back then, we'd push ourselves to the limit, tackling trails in some of the most remote places. Most friends who joined us would have blisters by the end and vowed never to come back, so it usually ended up being just me and him. We checked off Baxter State Park and the Adirondacks when we were still in the Northeast. Then after Mark moved to Virginia, we hiked Shenandoah and the Great Smoky Mountains. As time passed, we started dreaming of somewhere further and wilder. That's how we ended up setting our sights on the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, specifically the Cloud Peak Wilderness. The Cloud Peak Wilderness is one of the largest roadless areas in North America, spanning nearly 200,000 acres, and it felt like the perfect place for a real adventure. So, in late spring of 2013, we met up in the town of Buffalo before heading out into the mountains. By that time, we were both pretty seasoned outdoorsmen, so starting off felt like just another hike. But about a day in, we realized we were truly far from any road or highway and completely cut off from civilization. I'd been to isolated places before, but there was something different about Cloud Peak. The Appalachian Trail, for example, is wild but well-traveled. In Cloud Peak, it felt like we were crossing into something more risky. Mark had brought an old Colt .45, having gotten the necessary permits, so we weren't too worried about wildlife. Our bigger concern was water. To cover long distances, we kept our water supplies light, relying on creeks and streams along the way rather than lugging gallons around. In previous trips, water was never an issue, and we usually planned routes to hit water sources as we hiked. But this time was different. Late April of 2018 was unusually hot, and many of the streams were dried up or stagnant. Each water source we passed was more disappointing than the last. We were about to give up when we finally found a fast-moving stream and filled our bottles, knowing it might be the last clean water we'd see for miles. By day 6 of our 9-day hike, we were in a desperate situation with our water. When your urine starts to darken, it's a bad sign. We thought about cutting the trip short and hiking to the nearest store, at least a day and a half away. But we pushed on, and at one point stopped for a brief rest. Mark wandered off a bit to relieve himself, and then I heard a strange, high-pitched noise, like a fox or coyote yipping. I heard Mark say, "What the heck?" I couldn't help laughing, imagining him getting scared by some small critter. But when I walked over to him, I found him shaken, looking up into the trees. When I asked what had spooked him, he said it wasn't an animal. It was a young boy who had disappeared into the trees after making the noise. At first, I thought maybe the boy was camping with his family nearby. But as thirsty as we were, all I could think about was finding the kids' camp to see if we could beg for water. Mark wasn't so sure. He thought there was something strange about the boy. When I asked him to explain, he hesitated, but eventually agreed to go look. We followed the direction where the boy had run, and after a while, we stumbled upon a clearing with an old cabin on the far side. Sitting on the porch swing was an elderly person with an unusual appearance. As we got closer, I politely asked if they had water to spare. Another figure came out of the cabin, a short young man who looked barely older than a teenager but had a vacant, unnerving expression and thick glasses. He held a small dog and, much to my shock, barked at me like a dog. The old man just stared blankly, and the young man continued barking. A moment later, a girl emerged, strikingly different in appearance. She looked about 13 or 14, with jet black hair and bright amber eyes, unlike the rest of her family. She spoke broken English but understood enough to invite us inside to fill our water bottles. Inside, the place was a mess, and the water in their tank was murky. Desperate, we searched the cabinets for anything bottled, but the girl interrupted us, telling us we needed to leave because her daddy didn't like strangers. Mark took the hint and moved toward the front door, but then we both heard a loud bark, deeper and more menacing than the young man's. Mark's face went pale as he turned and told me, "Run!" We bolted out of the house, hearing the angry shouts of Daddy behind us as we ran into the woods. Luckily, we soon found another stream, filled our bottles, and continued the rest of our hike without looking back. When we got home, that encounter became one of our go-to stories, but it stayed with me. We figured the family had likely been there for generations, refusing to move when the area was declared a wilderness zone. After doing some research, I learned that such isolation sometimes led to inbreeding, which could explain the family's appearance and behavior. The girl, however, looked so different that I began to wonder if she'd come from outside the family. I reached out to the local police in Buffalo, who confirmed that a family lived in that area but claimed there was no evidence of anything sinister. Still, the girl's origins haunted me. To this day, I can't shake the suspicion that someone, perhaps to prevent Daddy from taking a girl from town, might have arranged for her to end up with that family. I have no proof, of course, but the thought lingers. Someday, I plan to return to Cloud Peak to see if she's still there. Maybe this time I'll find some answers, though I fear what I might uncover. Back in the day, I worked for the National Trust in Scotland. It was a pretty lonely job, with most of my time spent either driving long distances or wandering through the highlands in rough weather. At work, I had a big 4x4 to drive, but outside work, I had to rely on my own car, which was terrible. One Saturday, I planned to drive down to England for my mum's birthday. My boyfriend and I had this big surprise arranged for her. I'd drive down in the morning, help set up, and then go pick her up for the surprise. I was thrilled about it, and I was sure my mum would be over the moon. But what I wasn't too sure about was my poor little Nissan Micra making it all the way without any problems. So, there I was, driving through the highlands, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, when the engine started making some really nasty sounds. I pulled over, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I thought I could make it to a garage, but when I tried to start the car again, it wouldn't budge. The engine tried to turn over but just wouldn't start, no matter what tricks I tried. Nowadays, I just open an app and call for a tow. But back then, with a spotty mobile signal, breaking down in the middle of nowhere was a real hassle. I tried the engine a few more times, all while preparing myself for the cold walk ahead. It was November, so freezing, with highland winds that made the idea of walking feel impossible. But finally, I zipped up my coat, put on my hat and gloves, and got out of the car. Just as I started walking, a car appeared in the distance. The road was lined with trees, so I hadn't seen it coming. I silently prayed that whoever it was would stop for me, and they did. But looking back, I don't think it was a higher power that answered my prayers that day. The car pulled over, and a middle-aged man with a friendly face rolled down his window and asked if I was okay. I told him about my car trouble, and he said he might be able to get a friend to come and fix it on the cheap. I was thrilled. He invited me into his car, and we started making small talk, swapping stories about why we were both in Scotland. Once we got to my car, he pulled out his phone and started texting, apparently contacting his friend. He explained that in the Highlands, texting worked better than calling because the signal was so weak. After a minute or two of holding his phone up, he assured me that the message had gone through, and his friend would be on the way. I just had to wait a little while. As we waited, though, I noticed a small inconsistency in his story. At first, he said his business was based in one area, but later he mentioned another location. I didn't think too much of it at the time. People misspeak all the time, and maybe he had more than one office. But it was the first small red flag. A bit later, he asked if anyone was expecting me, using that exact phrase, "Is anyone expecting you?" I must have given him a strange look because he added, "You know, do you have plans later?" I told him about my mom's party and how I'd been planning it for weeks, but he just nodded and looked off into the distance. The question and his lack of interest gave me a bad feeling. At that point, I knew I needed to do something. So, I asked how long his friend would take, and he checked his phone, saying it would only be a few more minutes. I told him I needed to grab some things from my car just in case it needed a tow and stepped out. Once at my car, I pretended to search for things, all the while watching the road. After a few minutes, a big white van pulled up behind us. The van looked brand new, and there were two people in it instead of one. Something didn't feel right. I decided I would wait to see if they were actually there to help. But just as I thought this, the stranger called out, saying that his friend was already working on my car. Only I could see part of my car and no one was there. Right then, his tone of voice changed, and to my shock, he used my name, which I'd never given him. I was hiding among the trees, and when he started calling my name, he made it clear that if I didn't show myself, it wouldn't be good for me. That was the scariest moment of my life. Then, I heard an engine start, and I saw the stranger's car drive off. But instead of leaving, one of the men in the van stepped out, wearing a mask, and started searching the trees. That was when I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had, only stopping when I couldn't go any farther. I must have looked a mess because after a while, a driver finally stopped to help me. They took me to the police station where I reported everything. I was scared, exhausted, and disappointed, knowing I wouldn't make it to my mom's party. I spent the night at a bed and breakfast, feeling like the whole day had been a nightmare. The police questioned the man, but since he hadn't broken any laws, they couldn't charge him. He claimed he was just trying to help, and I'd run off for no reason. Even now, I can't help but wonder how many others weren't as lucky as I was that day. I'm grateful I escaped, but the thought of others who might not have haunts me. There's no other way to describe Somerville County, West Virginia, than as being in the middle of nowhere. As one of the state's southern counties, Somerville is among the most rural places in the eastern U.S. There's not a single traffic light or fast food restaurant in the whole county, and its population density is one of the lowest nationwide. Like most rural places in the eastern United States, Somerville has its share of issues with drug abuse and the crimes that come along with it. But cases of murder or disappearance are incredibly rare, and when they do happen, they grab the attention of the entire community and local law enforcement. So, in May 2006, when a rusty red Ford truck was found abandoned near a deserted building outside Middletown, fear spread quickly through the small town. This was because the truck belonged to a man named Samuel Ray Daniels, who had already been missing for nearly 3 weeks. According to his missing persons report, Samuel was over 200 pounds, had brown hair, and light blue eyes. He was last seen wearing a blue flannel shirt, gray cargo shorts, and black sneakers. It's believed he was also wearing a military tag necklace that had been passed down to him, along with a small pocket knife. Close friends said that Samuel sometimes went a week or so without shaving but was never seen with a full beard. He also had a slight stutter when he spoke. In the days before the truck was found, the local sheriff's office managed to piece together some details about Samuel's last known movements. On April 10th, he visited his mom and, for the most part, seemed like his usual self. They had small talk about his job cutting timber, which, though not high-paying, made his mom proud that he was working, especially with the economy in such bad shape. However, his mother noticed him acting a bit jumpy, looking out her trailer window every so often, almost like he was expecting someone. She didn't think much of it, chalking it up to his protective nature, but it was the last time anyone would see him alive. The only clue to his whereabouts was his truck, which appeared over 2 weeks later. Even with his mother's concerns, the police initially said there was no indication of foul play. However, reports from reliable sources claimed the driver's window of the truck was broken, with glass scattered inside, suggesting it had been shattered from outside. Even so, authorities declared there was no evidence of a struggle, speculating the window could have been broken at any time. Samuel's family told officers it was highly unusual for him to vanish without telling someone, even briefly. While he'd had minor run-ins with the law in the past, he had no active warrants, nor was he suspected of any recent thefts. People who knew him described Samuel as a gentle, kind person who was not involved in drug dealing or even in using drugs, which ruled out the idea that he might have left town to dodge an arrest. His belongings were still in his home. Reinforcing this viewpoint, two main theories emerged about Samuel's disappearance. The first theory is that he might have owed money to a local biker gang known to pass through town from time to time. This idea came about because Samuel's sister had been seeing a man in a biker gang chapter from a nearby city. She had a reputation for struggling with money and drugs, so there's a possibility that the gang held her family responsible for her debts. When Samuel couldn't pay, the gang might have decided to make an example of him. The second theory involves a local rumor about bad blood between Samuel and a local deputy, known for being rough and corrupt. It was common knowledge in Middletown that a certain officer acted as though he was above the law. Samuel had received a traffic ticket from this officer, one he felt was unfair. Samuel contested the ticket in court and actually won, receiving a decent payout as a result. The officer in question was reprimanded, which reportedly left him humiliated, and it's possible he sought revenge. This might explain how the broken window was written off as no sign of a struggle. While these theories are detailed, they remain just theories. No one knows what truly happened to Samuel Daniels. Without his truck, it would be nearly impossible for him to leave Somerville County, given the lack of local taxis or public transportation. The only explanation is that someone picked him up, whether he was conscious or not, alive or otherwise, and took him out of the area. Middletown is a tiny town of just a few hundred residents. Word travels fast, and people talk, but no one reported seeing Samuel after his last visit with his mother. The woods around town are dense but well-trafficked by hunters trying to save a few bucks on groceries. If Samuel had been harmed and left in the woods, a hunter or their dog would likely have found some trace of him. It's as if he simply vanished without a trace. Perhaps, if someone did have a hand in making Samuel disappear, they knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Someone who might have experience in such matters. But as to who that person might be remains anyone's guess. Perhaps it's best to tread lightly on speculation, as upsetting the wrong person could be dangerous. Electric Vibe is an electronic music festival that typically happens at the end of June in a remote part of Rothbury, Michigan. Hidden within Sherwood Forest, the festival feels like it's miles away from anything else, using the forest's natural beauty to enhance the experience for all who attend. During the day, visitors can wander through the mesmerizing woodland, lounging among the pop-up art displays or in one of the many hammocks strung between trees. But when night falls, the forest transforms, glowing with colorful lights, which many say is when the real thrill begins. The atmosphere, with its eye-catching light shows, hidden parties, and a lineup of artists chosen to keep energy high, creates a truly unforgettable time for everyone. It was this very event that 29-year-old Kevin Grant hoped to attend in the summer of 2018. A native of Oakland County, Michigan, Kevin got tickets for himself and his girlfriend, who loved the idea of celebrating in such an unusual spot. Both were fans of electronic music but had grown tired of the same old club scene. Electric Vibe offered a fresh way to change things up. However, after just a day or two of festivities among the trees, the joyful mood between Kevin and his girlfriend took a turn, and they began to argue. Rumors vary about what caused their fights, from running low on cash to excessive drinking, or Kevin possibly seeing his girlfriend getting too friendly with other men. But what's certain is that, after one particularly intense argument, Kevin stormed out of the main festival grounds to their campsite, alone. Some festival goers saw a visibly upset man leaving, who might have even been crying. It would be sad if this were merely the end of a turbulent relationship. But what makes this story even more unsettling is that Kevin was never seen again after that night. His girlfriend returned to the campsite hours later, expecting to find him sleeping off the effects of alcohol or drugs. But when she looked into the tent, it was empty. She wasn't immediately worried, thinking he had either gotten lost or joined another group to lift his spirits, or maybe even headed back to the main festival area. So she went to sleep. The next morning, however, Kevin still hadn't returned. His girlfriend wasn't alarmed yet, but when the festival ended and she had to head home without him, she grew more concerned. Kevin also didn't seem to have gone back to his apartment. She finally reached out to his family to report his strange disappearance, and they soon involved the police. Law enforcement conducted an extensive search around the festival site, using search dogs, aerial units, and divers, but no sign of Kevin turned up. The authorities then asked the public for help, and calls came in from people who thought they'd seen him in nearby towns and even in other states. Some sightings reported him at a motel not far from the festival. Others mentioned a diner in a nearby town. There were also stories that he may have left to join a religious group known to be at the festival, which had a bus decorated with their symbols. The group, called the Word of Faith, was a charismatic community from Ann Arbor, Michigan, established in the late 1960s. However, a spokesperson denied that they attended the festival, and Kevin's family insisted he would never leave without telling them. His girlfriend's behavior following his disappearance raised suspicions. She made some sorrowful posts on social media, almost as if Kevin had already been declared dead, despite him officially being missing. Instead of cooperating with Kevin's family, she blocked many of them and stopped answering their questions about what happened that weekend. She later posted online that Kevin had been dealing with mental health issues and had previously threatened to take his life. Whether she simply wants to move on from this painful chapter, or if she knows more than she's letting on, remains unknown. Police also questioned some of the festival staff who were working that weekend, although most didn't specifically remember seeing Kevin. Some workers did mention that people disappear at these events almost every year, including one who claimed a person who had been partying hard was found as far away as Alabama. Another festival staffer mentioned it wasn't uncommon for attendees to die from excessive drinking or drug use, sometimes due to risky mixes of substances. He shared a disturbing rumor about a festival goer who died sitting upright, with others unknowingly partying around him until they realized he wasn't just asleep. One staff member told police about a man who seemed very distressed, giving away his belongings, including pricey electronics and large amounts of cash. This seemed to align with reports from Kevin's family that he'd emptied his bank account shortly before the festival. So what actually happened to Kevin that weekend? Was he so heartbroken over his fight with his girlfriend that he chose to disappear? Could a religious group have lured him in during his vulnerable state, using the influence of drugs or alcohol to affect his thinking? Whatever the truth, the unsettling possibility remains that one could simply vanish from a lively, seemingly harmless event like a music festival. It's a chilling reminder that safety isn't always as certain as it appears, no matter where we are or what we're doing. Driving through the dense woods in the middle of nowhere near Mountain Springs, Arkansas, you might just catch sight of an odd-looking structure nestled among the rolling hills. At first, you may think you're imagining things, seeing something so unusual rising above the treetops. The building that comes into view looks more like it belongs in the Swiss Alps than in rural Arkansas. A massive, medieval-style castle that seems straight out of a storybook. But this site isn't imaginary at all. The structure is indeed real. This mysterious residence, known as Hensmere, is one of the largest, most extravagant homes in the entire country, shrouded in mystery and whispers of intrigue. Yet the secrecy surrounding it may not just be because its owner is extremely private. It could be that the truth is too disturbing for the public to handle. Construction of Hensmere began back in 2009, when a former military intelligence officer turned entrepreneur had plans drawn up for an ultimate countryside estate. It would be an understatement to say that Robert C. Huff was ambitious when he dreamed up a 70,000 square foot home, but as a former physicist and founder of Sentinel Systems, he had the means and patience to see it through. What makes Hensmere truly unique isn't only its design, but also the materials used in its construction. Hensmere was built with a cutting-edge insulated concrete framework, with walls over a foot thick, reinforced with a high-strength steel fiber called helix. This advanced mixture of concrete and metal is reportedly strong enough to withstand nearly anything, be it human-made or natural disasters like explosions, fires, earthquakes, or hurricanes. Nothing could so much as scratch Hensmere, exactly as Huff had envisioned it. The structure is bulletproof, blast-proof, fireproof, insect-proof, and more or less indestructible. This house will still be standing in 2,000 years. Huff once remarked in an interview with a real estate magazine that spotlights unique properties, and it's publicly known that he went to great lengths to test the durability of his home. It took 8 long years before Hensmere was finally deemed ready for occupancy. During construction, part of the mansion even sank into a massive hole on the grounds, but Huff pushed forward, and the end result is truly remarkable. When it was completed in late 2017, Hensmere stood 5 stories tall, featuring 5 distinct living spaces with 14 bathrooms, 12 bedrooms, a music room, an observatory, a grand hall, theaters, and an array of other spaces, including a personal museum curated by Huff himself. Hensmere is also equipped with over 4,000 advanced solar panels, several tons of batteries, and is surrounded by herds of rare Ossabaw Island hogs, a hardy breed kept as a self-sustaining food source. Huff invested hundreds of millions into creating a highly efficient, self-reliant fortress in one of the most secluded regions of the country. But a question lingers: why would a former Army intelligence officer and CIA consultant build such a structure? Publicly, Huff has explained that Hensmere is an experiment, a model of a fully self-sufficient, energy-efficient, secure structure that could be adapted for schools, hospitals, or any facility needing stability in disaster-prone areas. According to Huff, it serves as a showcase of the durability of Sentinel Systems' materials and architectural capabilities, a kind of large-scale advertisement. But why choose the Ozarks? Why not somewhere remote like Alaska or Nevada? Huff mentioned that the area where Hensmere is built has fewer building restrictions, with local authorities allowing more freedom in private projects. Arkansas also presents all types of environmental challenges: extreme temperatures, severe storms, allowing Huff to prove that his vision could withstand even the harshest weather. But if this was only a demonstration, why not build something smaller? Why go to such great lengths? Locals have whispered many theories over the years, including that Hensmere might be a hidden base for a shadowy organization, a place where they would gather if the world faced a cataclysm. Others believe it could be a covert government installation, with a network of tunnels housing anything from experimental technology to classified bioweapons labs. Some say they've heard loud noises from the direction of Hensmere at night, like a distant train passing by, even though there are no train tracks nearby. A few locals claim to have seen black, unmarked SUVs driving in convoys toward the estate, along with ominous helicopters and security guards who turn away anyone who comes too close. One local reportedly tried flying a small drone over the compound, only for the device to short out and drop from the sky. So what is Hensmere's true purpose? If it were just the extravagant home of a wealthy, slightly eccentric recluse, we might understand why it was built the way it was. But Robert Huff is far more than just a reclusive billionaire. He's a former intelligence officer and a physicist, someone whose career was built on knowing hidden truths. So what does Huff know that we don't? What knowledge from his years in intelligence led him to build a fortress in the middle of nowhere? We can only hope we'll never have to find out. Let's hope the secrets buried in Hensmere stay hidden.